Hi everyone, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Johnny Rowlands. I'm a lecturer in the East Midlands Centre, and I'm here because Alex has very kindly asked me to do a little video just introducing my book. This is The Metaphysics of Historical Jesus Research. I don't know if that writing will be the right way around when you watch this. Apologies if it's not. The Metaphysics of Historical Jesus Research. It was published in 2022 by Rutledge, and this is just a little introduction to what it's about, why I've written it, why I think it's important, and why you might find it interesting. So, to understand why I've written this book, it might be helpful for you to know a little bit about my personal story to faith. So, I was brought up in a Christian family. However, when I was about 16, 17, I became an atheist. However, I was still really interested in questions of the historical Jesus and the historical world of the New Testament. And so I went off to university, went to the University of Nottingham to do an undergraduate degree in theology, as you do when you're an atheist. However, at the end of my second year, I became a Christian, and I very quickly realized that my entire understanding about the nature of reality, including how the past works and how we ought to study history, had completely changed. And yet, in my lectures, in my classes, in my essays, I was still expected not to bring any of that new understanding I had into my study of the past. So my lecturers would say things like, it's fine that you're a Christian, but this can't impact the way in which you do history, because this is to kind of prejudge the outcome of your investigation, that kind of thing. And so I went away and then came back to the University of Nottingham and did a PhD thesis. And this book is the published form of that PhD thesis. What I wanted to do originally was to put forward an argument for what it looks like to be a Christian historian. So, in other words, as Christians, how do we study the past, especially when it comes to the historical Jesus, in a way that is rigorous, is scholarly, is critical, is open for critique, and isn't just completely closed off? However, I very quickly realized that people had lots of resistance to this idea. So people just thought, well, you can't do this. You can't bring your Christian theology into the study of history because history is supposed to be objective. And so what I did was I wrote an introduction justifying why I thought it was okay for me to be doing this project. However, this introduction very quickly got bigger and bigger and bigger until it became the whole project itself. And so this book essentially is a justification for why it's okay to bring aspects of Christian theology into our study of the past, especially when it comes to the person of Jesus of Nazareth. So the book is split into two halves. In the first half, I look at the nature of historiographical decision making. What I mean by that is, how do historians make judgments about the past? And I realized very quickly that historians make judgments about the past on a scale of plausibility. So if we're thinking as an historian about whether something happened, we have either option A or option B. We'll go with option A if we think that's more plausible. We'll go with option B if we think that's more plausible. But this raises all sorts of questions. How do we measure plausibility? Who gets to determine what is plausible? Those kind of questions. And I argue that plausibility is measured in direct correlation to a historian's worldview. Now, a worldview I define as being a series of metaphysical presuppositions we take for granted. So, in other words, a set of claims that we take to be true, whether we know it or not, about the nature of the world, the nature of reality, how the world works, how cause and effect works, all that kind of thing. So, if we're looking at option A and option B, we'll go with whichever option we consider to be more plausible. And the option that is considered to be more plausible is considered to be plausible because it more closely relates to our worldview, our pre-existing understanding of the way in which the world works. And so this leads me to ask the question, well, which kind of worldviews are in effect in historical Jesus? And so in the second half of the book, I look at historical Jesus research more closely. I look at what's called the three quests for the historical Jesus. We're now thought to be at the end of the third into the start of a fourth quest. And I say that in each of these different bits of the quest for the historical Jesus, we can see that the worldviews that are operative in the study of the past is a secular worldview. It's a worldview that doesn't permit religious and theological presuppositions to influence our study of the past. This is how I define secular in the first half of the book. Towards the end of the book, I use N.T. Wright as a test case, so that even in the case of a Christian theologian and historian like N.T. Wright, his approach to history is still secular. And this causes all sorts of problems when it comes to look at the resurrection, for example. In the final chapter of the book, I say that this is a real problem because secularism itself is essentially born out of the Christian tradition. And I look at John Milbank and Charles Taylor as two really helpful theologians who help us to see this. So for Charles Taylor, theological movements in the Reformation period lead towards secularism. For John Milbank, he traces this back even further into the medieval period with a guy called John Duns Scotus, who's a bit of a villain for John Milbank, rightly or wrongly. And I say, well, if secularism is just Christian thought gone awry, there's no real reason why we need to hold to a secular metaphysics when we're doing history. There should be more discussion about the metaphysical presuppositions that we use when we're doing history. And so I end the book by calling for a greater plurality of metaphysical frameworks in history, in the way in which we study the past. And I say that one of these frameworks might be a Christian one. And so that's a very, very broad, sweeping overview of the argument I'm trying to make in this book and why I think it's important. Like I say, it's my PhD thesis, so at times it's a little technical. I think that's probably fair to say. I'd like to think it's as readable as it could be, but this is grappling with some really difficult issues. I really hope you get a chance to read it. If you have any questions about it, feel free to email me. My email is available on the college website. I'd love to have a chat with you about it. Thanks for watching. I hope you find it interesting.